and welcome to HR Nightmares, where we are breaking down real workplace kind of situations with real talk and a little bit of humor. So let's have a laugh because this one is going to be probably pretty bad. We're going to get a lot of hate mail from other HR people because we are here to talk about HR people from hell. Cue the heavy metal.
Well, let's remind the audience we've done employees from hell. We've done managers from hell. So we got to hate a little on our own people and acknowledge that sometimes the HR people are the problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. Oh my God. All right. So the beautiful part about being a reputable award-winning consultancy is that we do a lot of cleanup. So we're going to reflect on some of the situations that we've had to step into. HR folks that were full-time in organizations we've consulted with that just flat out needed to get kicked to the curb. And why. We'll talk about people who want to be like us. And then we'll talk about maybe some policy police, people who they never made it to law school, but they wish they had.
Yeah.
And they just want to
They
go
really
back
love
on.
those policies.
Oh God, I love that handbook so much. Oh. So then you've got, of course, the people who just love to pretend that they remember everything from college days, their employment law classes. And I'm sorry, but unless you're living and breathing that on a day to day, that is why we have,
that is why
Google
we consult
with attorneys
legal
and
people.
stuff like that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So we'll kind of riff a little bit on situations. It's a little bit of storytelling time, without, of course, divulging any kind of confidential information. Although there are people who over-index on the confidentiality out there, so that's another sort of pet peeve of ours.
I know
when we get around to some clients and just really see on the front lines what's been going down in the HR department, and we try to sort of eliminate dysfunction. So you talk about HR nightmares. Sometimes HR people are the nightmare. I know TikTok's going to just have a field day with this because on every freaking reel that we post, people are like, I hate HR. HR is the devil.
I think that's a testament to why we're doing this episode, because there are some really poor HR people out there.
There are a ton of bad actors.
And it may be for a variety of reasons, right? But I think we started this episode, we were talking about, what we wanted to talk about. And I'm on a few of these websites where I get kind of daily things. I read these stories. Essentially, I'm on this one that's like a Reddit for,
What's
employment stuff.
I love this.
Fairy God Boss.
Fairy God Boss.
Yeah, it's like a female thing, I think, too. And it's cool. They have a lot of different things, but I get the ones that are the write-ins. I get a little daily or weekly email, and it's always the write-in questions. And I click on it once in a while, and my gosh, what employees are experiencing out there. I'm just do you not have HR? Is HR not a presence? Do they have no authority? Do they have no seat at the table and they can't influence the people managers? Or are they just really bad and they're the ones giving you this guidance? But it's really sad. It's sad when you read these stories day after day, and all I think is I could so quickly answer this question for this employee, but they're turning to fairygodboss.com or whatever it's called, to write in to get
also,
a bunch
we'll take
of
any kind of
strangers.
sponsorship from fairygodboss.com for another.
I love it. I love your site. And it's just they're going to the general public to get a question about whether they're eligible for FMLA. And you're like, what? So it's crazy to me. And we, are HR people for a lot of organizations in town here, local in Wilmington, because they're small and they don't need a full-time HR person. But then we have those clients where we have to go in, and unfortunately they didn't have a strong HR person. So now it's you're trying to build credibility with an entire organization. And it's fair that they don't like HR, don't want to go to HR because who they had was not good.
I think I can always tell when I'm coming in behind someone who is not good is if there's a meeting of people maybe in the coffee room getting coffee and they're like, oh, there's HR.
HR.
There's
HR's
HR.
here.
Oh.
Don't say
and
anything.
You're like, oh, for heaven's sakes, that annoys me because we're not there to do that. But okay, if we start off in a really nice way, the nicest way that we can say bad HR people, I think it's the incompetency. So I think that sometimes people might come up through the ranks.
That's a nice way.
That's the nice way.
one. You're incompetent.
Well, because it's not their own fault that they're incompetent.
Is incompetency not
No,
your
they
own
might
fault?
just not have had the
Sometimes
schooling.
it is.
No, they might not have had the schooling, or
Or they're
like
just not
this-
curious and they don't self-develop well.
Okay, maybe it's not so nice, but you're
Well,
exactly right.
let's talk about incompetence. All right, look. Someone at the helm of an entire HR function for let's call it a sizable organization. Let's say like 50 plus people. That does not need to be their first HR job, right? Like that person probably should not be coming right out of college and actually should probably have like I'm saying 5 and I'm wincing, like that person should have 7 to 10 years. You're going to pay, but you're going to get somebody good.
Right.
And like, you don't need to be hiring a 24-year-old to be running
went
a sizable
to college, only undergrad to get their experience.
Yeah,
totally
like you
agree.
got to get there's a little bit of grittiness that you need to have in order to be an effective HR leader. And when I say leader, this is somebody that's going to have to be a generalist of sorts and probably lead other specialists or generalists. And it's hard to make decisions, really well-educated decisions, if you barely have any experience. And I've come across a lot of organizations that try to hire someone into HR, maybe from another department. And sometimes that works out well because there's translatable skills. But like hiring someone right out of school in a HR leadership role is tough.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it.
I mean, I agree. I would think what Beth was saying, and she was being nice, but some of the incompetence is because someone was maybe given the position that really shouldn't have gotten it to begin with
that's
because
what I
they
was
didn't have the qualified skills. I knew that's where you were just giving me a hard time. But that's very true. And we've seen that in organizations where, I've had a client where I came in after the HR person, and that wasn't even technically their job title, but that's really their job responsibilities. And they were an internal. So they knew a lot about the organization, but they didn't know how to manage people and to help people managers manage people. And they didn't know the first thing about, employment law and policies, let alone how to write them or enforce them. And it wasn't their fault. They really shouldn't have been given that role and responsibility. And unfortunately, it didn't work out well for them. So yeah, business leaders, we've got to make good decisions and make sure the right people are in the right jobs too. And that's that part of incompetency.
I think it's the experience too.
Yeah.
Or if you're new and then you have maybe like a kitchen cabinet of people that you can go to ask, or if you have a fractional HR support that you can call,
Yeah, you've got Leath HR Group on speed dial to be
And
able to
then
just
you
make sure,
can-
hey,
you
I'm
can
going to
do
do the
that,
thing.
right. And
what
is
do you
this-
think? Is this
Yeah,
then that's
because we
fine.
certainly have clients that are small enough where it's like they can have that entry level HR manager or first time HR director that kind of is. Sometimes we replace ourselves when a organization gets big enough, and they can do the job because they're curious and they're hungry and they're gonna build those skills, but they may not know the answer to every single question right there. I mean, I don't always know the answer to every single question. Like I can figure it out,
Yeah,
but
sometimes
sometimes I
we
do phone.
call-
We
right,
call
we
each
call each
other.
other.
Sometimes we're like, "What do you think about this?" And we've dealt with a lot of situations. So certainly, if they have some good resources, it can be done. But yeah, I do think that there's a lot of incompetence.
I've worked with a client that did an internal position change from just a pure admin, really like receptionist level, and is now into the kind of secret part of HR, performance evaluations, has the ability to read these and different things like that, and salaries.
Yeah.
It is a mess. And so sometimes
How's their confidentiality?
oh my God, it's so bad. It is. It's
Well, it's
so
hard to
bad.
go from the office admin where everyone comes to you and you are a very good source of truth and honesty from the team member and employee base because they come to you and you get all the gossip and the juice and the things. You're a great resource for the HR leader. It's hard to transition. It's hard enough to go from buddy to boss, but then it's really hard to transition from the gossip, the center of all gossip,
right
to the HR director, HR
Right.
lead.
It's so hard.
I mean,
And you have
That's a
access
recipe for disaster.
to all of that, right? And then maybe you feel slighted. This person has felt slighted. Like, I can't believe I'm not making this much. And they start to get into those comp decisions, and you're like, that's the wrong
Well,
person
and you
for this
have to have
position.
enough of the HR professional skills and development to understand, like, listen, when you have access to all this information, it isn't all digestible at the same time. But I mean, I think all of us have had the situation where we're like, I'm sorry, my peer is making how much more than I am, right? But
Yeah.
it is what it is. And you have to like depersonalize and be able to do some of that stuff in HR because you do have access to all the private information. So you've got to be professional about it too.
Anytime throughout my career that I've ever brought somebody onto my team from outside of a traditional HR sort of like promotion path, it's the first conversation I have before they come and start like officially working is like, can you handle it knowing what your peers make and you think they're lazy, you think they suck, you think they are never in the office, you think, and you have opinions on people and they're going to make $50,000-$60,000 more than you. Can you handle it?
And they
'Cause
might
you
get
gotta be able to handle
promoted
it.
and they
Yeah.
might get a bigger job. And it's like, you have to be able to digest and accept that
they have
that's not your
obnoxious
decision.
personalities. They're this,
Yeah.
they're that. They're not you, but like, hey, you got to handle
deal
it.
with that.
Yeah, you got to. And some people just can't.
Yeah.
They just can't. And so that's something you got to look for.
So after incompetence, then we were talking about the people that love to be, what were you saying about they want to be?
The shit stirrer.
There you
So
Oh,
HR
the shit
managers,
stirrer.
this is where we're going to get a great, we're good.
Which is what we're doing right now, shit stirring.
Yeah,
a
we
little
are stirring
bit.
the pot.
Yep.
Come on now. We don't get enough of this.
I know.
though.
We got to have some entertainment too.
Yeah. So tell us about, hey, pop it in the comments here. We want to know, tell us your stories about an HR person who made your life a living hell and why. And we want to respond to that. Maybe we'll take it as like some of our audience write-ins the next time.
Yeah.
Because it'll just be interesting stories to share. But HR people that make the team members' lives hell are the worst kind of HR people because you're supposed to be there as like this advocate for employees, but also like an ambassador and advocate for the employer. And let's face it, at the end of the day, guess who's signing my paycheck? The employer. But I'm
Yeah.
going to try to do my best to really be fair and neutral and mediate great conversations amongst people managers and the employees. But like, I work for the company. You
Yeah.
know? But the people who are like just they're after a peer leader. I've seen that. We've seen
Yeah.
that in a couple of clients where we've had to step in and like the HR person has been just trying to meddle in like department operations, which is very bizarre. And then like the person who's going after like targeting like a specific employee and like talking openly about things that should be confidential. Give some other examples about the person who's just constantly stirring the pot and causing drama instead of like quelching it. Is that a word? Quelching? I think it is.
Yeah.
Squash?
I don't know. Beth was on Jeopardy. She should know.
Yeah, you
Is
were
that
on
a word?
Jeopardy. I'm gonna look it up while you.
I don't know.
talk.
I'm trying to rack my brain about like real HR shit stirrers. I mean, I would say like where I dealt with a lot was just making sure the HR person wasn't like so close with the business leader that they just like, you felt like you could not trust them to tell them anything because they were just going to run to that business leader every time or they had their ear. And it's almost like they overpowered the business leader and they were making the decisions. And I think that's where we get into some like dangerous ground is like when HR all of a sudden is decision making and the business leaders are not. So I had more of that. Probably I'm trying to think. I would have to think
There's
more. You might
kind
have
of
more
like-
shit stirring.
Maybe the person that tries to like take all of the power that they have.
Yeah.
I need to sit down with you. We need to have a meeting. And really, instead of
I did that as an April Fool's joke one time. It was really.
listen,
How did that go over?
I have a stack of internet
tomorrow
history.
I'm getting the EEOC complaint.
It was many years ago.
But it's actually
I learned
really-
my lesson because a friend almost told me everything, and I was like, "Be quiet."
you're like, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I've seen that a lot where it's like, listen, I need to talk to you. I mean, really
Yeah.
aggressive and not very solution driven, right? So they just kind of want to use their power, use their intimidation, and not try to help somebody.
Yeah.
There is a lot of responsibility with being in HR. Like to your point, you don't want to be like the spy for the CEO, but you also do want to give them honest feedback and leadership team honest
Yeah.
feedback. but you have to have a level of diplomacy. So if somebody says like, hey, look, if I say this, they're going to know exactly who's complaining about it. And so there's a little massaging and finesse of like, you know, playing both sides to get to the end game. You almost have to be a bit of a chess player.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it's honesty, have to be honest on like both sides. And your job really is to be, if you're an HR director, chief people officer, right? We're HR business partners essentially. Yes. And our role is to be that business leader's partner. And in order to be a good partner, we have to communicate well. And I mean, I had a situation younger in my HR management career where the store manager was having a really hard time. We got a lot of complaints. She was new. I was new to that. It was a challenging location to begin with. She was making a lot of changes. It wasn't going over well. You know, we had 50 department managers in that store. A lot of them had a problem with her. And therefore I was just like by association. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I was the one getting all the complaints and the letters written in. I'm like, I haven't said any of this or done any of this. I'm harder on her than anyone else. It's just, they don't see that. I looked at her one time and I'm like, you are the problem in this store. Like, you're the problem, right? And like, you're the solution, you're the problem. And so, but they didn't know I was saying those type of things, but like, it was hard because people felt like they couldn't come to me because I was like her little right hand. And I'm like, I am, because she's struggling and I have to be there like all the time. So, you know, that was hard, and that was my, you know, situations and stuff. But
I think that sometimes weak players, and sometimes maybe they're weakened by their own skills or lack of skills, but maybe they're also weakened by the organizational structure. But that's a really tough person, because you want to, you come to HR for solutions, or you come to say a grievance and hopefully get some help, or even ask a question about your benefits. But if they're really weak and they can't help you, why are we?
So that's kind of our next bucket of people. The like useless,
never help us.
You know, like, so useless. That's not a nice. I'm not going with best. Let's talk about the nice one.
Now we're getting dirty.
Well, I guess I think maybe I grew up in a service organization, and so everything we did was service, whether that was for the customers or the employees, right? And I always felt like when I was in HR, especially in that like assistant type role that I started in, or when I was a new manager and I didn't have an assistant, you know, it was my role to really provide those kind of services to those employees for their people needs and their organizational needs. And I really felt strongly about that. So, you know, in once in a while it was like, you have to call this number because that's your 401k and they won't talk to me, you know, like, but even that felt cringy to be able to, I'm like, if you want to sit here, I can help, you know, while you're sitting in my office, if you have other questions and I can help, we can put them on speaker, you know, those kind of things. But I always felt like it's my role to help them through this benefits question and this thing. Yes, do we have a benefit service center I could pass them off on? Sure, but I'm sitting right here, right? And so it drove me nuts when I became an HR director and I had a team of 21 HR leaders in those stores, because when I had a couple of people on my team that were not that. They were the call this number, call that number, call this number. It felt like they did not want to help the employees. And I'm like, then what are you doing here?
Right.
If you do not want to help the people with their people needs, this
like
isn't the right job for you.
pushers.
So I do feel like there's a good amount of people like that like they don't want to provide service to the employees. They don't want to deal with their issues.
Well,
and I'm like, that's what we're here for.
Mm-hmm. Those are the people that are unfriendly, unapproachable. Their doors are shut. I'm like, why are you closing? Why do you have a door shut if you're in HR?
It was within the last year you had a client where this was like happening. And it's a big HR department.
Kurt,
got their
open your door.
closed.
Open your door. That was like the first bit of advice.
Oh, doors
like,
closed everywhere annoys me.
But yeah, and then they would just like
what are you doing in there?
They would hand over. They had made these like laminated cards of phone numbers. They're like, drink, here you go. I'm like, no,
Put that in a
we're not
kiosk
doing that.
and go home.
Yeah.
Even I'm like, good Lord, I work with these clients 4 hours a week. And when the employee emails me, I'm like, let me reach out. I don't say, here, call the benefits broker. And yes, we have those phone numbers. Once in a while I do. If I can't get to them, it's a day I'm not at the client. But most of the time I'm like, why don't you try this first? And then why don't you try calling that benefits? And in the meantime, I'm going to email this person. You know, like it's divide and conquer.
Something today happened. There is a younger person who is purchasing a home, and they took a withdrawal from their 401k rather than a loan. And there's tax implications.
Oh, Lord.
And I was like, hey. So I mean,
does the 401k though not allow loans? Because I have a
They
client
do.
that does that. And
They
it drives
allow
me
loans.
nuts.
So I call. I mean, so
They only allow hardship withdrawals, and I'm like,
You can buy a house with this.
Do we need to control people's money like that? I don't think we do.
If you want to buy a house, you can.
Yeah.
So, but I took it upon my own self. I'm like, this poor person doesn't probably know the ins and outs.
Yeah.
I can't talk to him about it, but I called the provider and I'm like, hey, you do loans for new houses.
Right.
And so I gave him the number to call for
Yeah.
that. But that's just kind of what you do.
But
as an
again,
HR
it's like if
person.
you don't want to be in service, then HR in the right role for you.
No, it's
Okay. Let me tell you about one of my pet peeve HR types. I love people. I want to do what you do.
Well, I always reference you when people say this. I'm like, you know what Leath would say back to you? Well, do you love their problems? Because in order to be HR, you have to love their problems as much as you love them.
That's
not.
right.
And nobody loves the problem.
Except for masochists. And 3 of them are sitting right here. Where some
I
of
know.
them
Sometimes I do wonder. I'm like, why? Why do I do this?
It's just awesome.
Well, I can't stand.
I could have been.
Oh my God.
I'm good at finances.
anything.
I could have been. I was good at the numbers part.
I know.
I could have been sitting in my little spreadsheet.
I could have been Jerry Maguire. God
Yeah.
damn it.
Instead, I'm listening to the drums, and I'm like, good Lord, it's a lot of drama for one day.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the policy police.
Okay. Yes.
HR,
My favorite.
the policy police. Beth, you can't. My favorite are the ones, but I'm like, that's not even real. So we all have clients. I have a couple organizations where like I've redone their handbook and I'm looking. They're telling me like, well, that's not allowed. I'm like, says who? And they're like, well, it says it in our policy manual. And I go, the one you just made up? Like we created the policy so we could change it. I mean, yes, certainly
totally.
there's certain federal regulations that we have to follow, but like the dress code guidelines overall, like we could change that.
Yeah, most of the time we could.
Yes,
Most
adjustments.
things we can change.
Yes,
except
it's
for pay.
just- and I
Pay's the
have
only
some
one.
people that are just like, that's what it says in the policy, so that's what we have to do. And I'm like, or we could rewrite the policy. We could
own our
also do
destiny.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just think that people, when they rely on it to like be written down in a manual, I also think that unfortunately they do make poor HR leaders, because most of what we do is living in the gray area, because it's human beings that we're dealing with, and they're all gray. There's not a lot of black and white.
Amy, you will hate this, okay? Because
Now I'm excited. Do tell.
I started changing all the handbooks, and you may have seen this at the clients that you took over for me, from a handbook to team guidelines and expectations. Do you like that or hate that? I know you hate it when I change the words of things that are
I just
traditional.
I hate people operations.
I know you
That's
do.
mostly what I hate. Team guidelines and expectations. I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
Look, I'm
For
like
the most
super
part,
pro
mine doesn't say.
expectations.
Most of mine that I write don't say. I think they say like employee guidelines and handbook or something, right? Like they're not like rules and regulations you must abide by. And
We're pro guardrails.
yeah,
right? But
yeah. I think it's like these are the general expectations. I mean, trust me, I get all of our clients. I'm like, let's write less. We don't need to spell out every single thing and how we the process behind how we deliver it. When we do that, that's when we get all the questions from the employees, because everyone's interpreting it a little bit differently. I'm dealing with this at one client right now, and I'm like, well, that's because we wrote way too much here and explaining it, and now it's a little confusing, and we created clarity because everyone is interpreting it differently. Here's how I interpret it through my HR brain. This was a process thing, but the employee who wants the additional time off, they're processing it through their time off brain, right? So yeah, there's stuff like that I'm like, I always say this. I'm like, I worked for a Fortune 100 company for 2 decades, and I think our employee handbook was about 6 or 7 pages. Not
it's like act like
80.
an adult.
It was so
Don't
funny.
do anything illegal.
Yeah, act right. And if you don't, we're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
I did. I had a client that was a bar restaurant type of client, and I was looking at some handbooks online to see. And there was one, and it was one page. Don't be an asshole.
Okay.
Don't be an
Okay.
asshole.
That's good.
Yeah.
To your boss, to your peers, to the clients, then you should be good.
Just
And
do
don't
the right
steal.
Yeah. And don't make up fake policies.
And don't get drunk on the job.
thing. I think that, but I go back
Unless
to
you're in an event. No. Oh, no.
And it's for you to do that?
and you're allowed to have one. But I do think
Two.
I think that when you this is my perception. If you're a big policy police person, I think it's because you want to fall back on that because you don't have the skills to do your job.
Yeah, again, you can't navigate that great. And I think that's it. We're all different humans, right? And I think there are a lot of people out there that are very good at kind of the black and white, where there's a rule, they can kind of deliver that rule. And that's more probably an analytical brain. And there's definitely some different styles and I can accept that. I just don't know that that's the best fit for an HR career, because I just think humans are humans. And most of the situations we deal with are like, well, all right. I mean, this is our expectation. We could do this. We've done this in the past, and we need to be consistent. And it's like delivering a whole, like, honestly, good judgment. It's good judgment, and it's not always written down. Like, what you should do for every situation is not going to be written out for you.
You also have to have a backbone.
Yeah.
Here's another thing you have to have. Be able to advocate for the employees. I had a client a long time ago that when I looked at their employee handbook, they offered 3 vacation days a year. And that's just, it's not
Just
good.
do 0.
So advocate for them. So I got in there and I was like, oh, this is a little ridiculous.
Yeah.
So they added, now they give 2 weeks off, but it just takes the fact that you're not, like, I like your balance. Like, obviously the employer pays your paycheck,
right,
but you still have to advocate for the employees. If you see things that are going on, you really want to change either the culture or the policies or some of the benefits that would really help them.
Right. Well, yeah. And that's why, you are in service to the people that are there. That's the whole essence and that's part of it. Obviously we have a whole other huge part that's having a seat at the table when we talk about business and all of that. Yes. I'm not disregarding any of that. That's probably the part that we all kind of enjoy more in these more senior level roles, but you still have to go back to, like, I want the best for these human beings that are sitting here. And that's why I have a seat at the table from a business perspective. And that is every bit as important as making sure that they have the right phone number and they got helped by the person on the other line that we hired as a third party to help our people. Well, and that doesn't always happen.
You have to be able to create a vision for what you want that employee experience to be, find the right who's on your team to help you execute and do it. And then you have to explain to the business why it's important. And at the end of the day, happiness and belonging and finding joy in your job is great. And it sounds like the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, you're going to get better work performance, better retention, and more discretionary effort, which for business leaders, that's dollar bills. So you have to focus on employee experience. It's hard to do that without good judgment, without experience. And you've got to get outside of this theoretical land that is employment law books and, like, relying only on what you read in a book or what you're reading online on the SHRM website. Like, you've got to get your head out and understand business and the business needs. And if you're not respected by your business peers, you don't have a chance.
Yeah. Well, relying on those here's my favorite one of business leaders that rely so much on the law. We're an at-will state, so we can fire them anytime we want. I'm like, well, that's what at-will means. That doesn't mean that they can't sue you for any reason that they'd like as well. Right. And so that's where I'm like, okay, yeah. And I've had HR leaders that have quoted that to me, and I'm like, okay. But I hope you went over with that business leader. Here's the repercussions of when you do that, and you do that without any warning, any documentation, any
I hope that it
coaching,
wasn't all women over the last 3 years and they all asked for a raise.
Like
you made a comment that, oh, geez, they're going to leave and, like, stay out on maternity leave forever and never come back. So I'm not going to give them
right. And it's
asking
like,
all the questions.
Okay. And even though, and I'm always like, okay, that may be the law, but, like, does that feel like the right thing to do for human beings? And I kind of always go back to that. I'm like, we don't have to do that. We also could do what's right for humans too, which is to coach them and give them a fair warning. I mean, we still are maybe going to end up terminating them. But let's tell them.
I put people on, they're like, I just had no idea that was an issue.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, see, guys, like, you just tell them what to do and then they improve.
Guess what? It's not that hard.
It's not hard.
I know. But that is, I mean, that's probably the most common thing of, like, people falling on that, like, but that's what's written down. And I'm like, okay, well.
Well, you can change what's written. It's your policy.
You'll get sued for it. But that's okay.
Here's a funny thing. I think I am a huge we've done a lot of terminations over my career, and I just feel like people that don't handle those well or compassionately and are very legalistic I hate that. And I think that that's really awful. So I don't.
Yeah, I think that's probably like, it's a skill that has to be built. It comes certainly more naturally to some to have that empathy and vulnerability than it does others.
Slap.
I'm not slating anyone at the table, but it's hard. I think
Your email is already turned off.
Oh my God, that's the worst. We already cut. The best is when I've had people like cut the email off and we haven't even delivered the termination yet. And you're like,
and they know, they're like,
what are you doing? Yeah. Or I heard from a coworker I was getting terminated today. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, we still deal with those all-time HR nightmares. But yeah, I think that's like a skill you develop over time. I certainly don't think I was as compassionate and empathetic because I wasn't as comfortable, right? When I was younger, earlier tenured in my career. And, at the age of 24 or 25, I was leading my first team of like 25 people as a department manager at Nordstrom. So I was the one delivering, if they were being termed, I was the one delivering that decision. And I certainly wasn't like as comfortable. Now I feel like I always was kind, even the worst employees, I still had kindness, which is shocking, I know, to some that know me well. But no, I am kind when it comes to that.
Have you ever gotten a hug by someone you fired?
I can say all the time.
It's very emotional and hard.
All the time. But I had a lot when I was a store manager and I had to, I only terminated. I was the only deliverer of the decision if they were people who directly reported to me. If we were terminating an employee or a salesperson or a support person, my department managers, they've made the decision. I approved the decision, but they had to learn how to communicate it, and HR would partner with them. But I did all the ones that were for stealing from our company. Those were my decisions, or something that was like a really big escalated issue. Those were my decisions, and the department manager did not deliver those. But a lot of the stealing ones, you'd be surprised how many people hugged me and said, "I'm sorry I've disappointed you." I used to be like, "I'm not your mother." Like,
But you did disappoint me.
Yeah, I'm disappointed that you made this decision because it is going to impact your life because you're going to get prosecuted and maybe go to jail. But, yeah, that was big, right? But and I hope you learn from it, right? Like my disappointment is not in you. It's in your choice that you made. And, but yeah, they used to hug me all the time because they were so upset that like I disappoint them, because a lot of them were my salespeople and they didn't encounter me in that kind of like coaching, redirective authority, right? I was this like presence in their life that was much more like they dealt with me more positively. And that was usually their first time dealing with that side.
I will say that is the sign of being a good advocate for the business and employees, when people who are exiting not on their own terms are still at least give you a little respect and like are thankful for having a relationship. Time that they work together.
I've also been cussed out, so it could go either way.
Oh, for sure. I got it. I'll never forget an email like, "F you." I like the all capital ones. "F you, pay me. You're gonna settle. I'm going to my lawyer."
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are exciting.
I had one that screamed "F you, Amy" at like all the way down the hallway. And it was this hallway of a store that we had that we used to call the cruise ship, because the hallway was like the length of the store, which was like a football field, right? And the back hallway was the length. And we were like the cruise ship. Like you would get dizzy if you looked all the way down the hallway. That's how long it was. All the way down that hallway. You, Amy. Some other choice words.
Should have used that tranquilizer.
Ripped up the document and like shredded it and threw it like in pieces all throughout the hallway, like a flower girl dropping her little petals. I was like, oh, good Lord. It was quite dramatic, but yeah.
Somebody like there was this giant credenza in the hallway. Their arm across it, all of the files, all of the papers falling on the floor. It was awful.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a good one. Okay. And I don't know if we have any other HR nightmare, HR manager types, but the types that get too close with the employees.
I don't recall, but like I feel like there's rumors, or my brain goes back to maybe well, I won't state. It was too
have had
too late in my
several.
career, and I don't want my old peers to be listening to this potentially and know
my
exactly what
gosh.
I'm talking about. But yes, HR people have
Several.
lost their jobs for getting a little too close.
Like giving advice about how the worst one that
Given something.
I
I think she means more like dating the HR people.
I was
yeah,
saying
yeah.
giving advice about IVF, like how to have a baby, like different things to do.
Yeah,
to
I
have
mean,
a
it's
baby.
hard, like, as HR, like, you have
like,
to maintain.
physicians.
Oh, wow. You have to maintain a certain amount of decorum. Like, you get really personal with employees and you want to help. And I love a lot of HR people are great, caring, wonderful, want to help, want to give, want to make sure the employees have great lives. But like, there's boundaries within that. And also saying like, okay, you're not their BFF. You're a medical doctor. Like, there's boundaries of
You're
that
not their
too.
financial advisor.
Yes,
You
like
probably
you gotta
shouldn't be their
careful.
girlfriend.
Like, you don't need to be
Yeah.
giving them quite that much advice. Let's give them some good tips and things, and then say, and if you need a resource, here's an expert. So like, I always am cautious. I'm like, listen, I know a couple of things. I want to make sure especially the financial stuff with like our younger employees that don't know, and
like to
stock
do
and
that
401k and stuff. I give them a few like tips and tricks and like things that I learned, made the mistake of when I was their age, but I try not to give them that
lot of
much.
advice.
Yeah. I think there's boundaries there. So.
Well, that about wraps it up. And I would say there are a lot of wonderful
Yes.
HR people out there. And we've had a
Yes.
bunch of them on this podcast. If you are a good HR person and you're like, oh, yeah, I know that person, or you're thinking or picturing someone that was an HR nightmare HR manager, we'd love to hear from you. And you can submit anonymous stories or questions through our website, leathhrgroup.com. We love hearing from the audience, and we absolutely have a great time responding to anonymous or non-anonymous questions. Tell us if you're an HR person. Tell us if you're a manager. Tell us if you are an employee. And tell us if we're wrong. We want to know. What do you think? But
I don't like to be told that I'm wrong, but I mean, you
tell
can
me
do it.
anonymously so I don't look you up and
do
come
it.
find you.
Just kidding.
Just kidding. Beth, any closing thoughts?
Don't be an asshole.
And with that, this is another episode of HR Nightmares. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. Follow us on social media. We put a lot of updates out there. And of course, we're on TikTok, and we know we're going to hear all about this episode. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time.